Welcome to the deep past. I'm a leaner haze. Tonight, we drift back to a colder Earth, more than 2.5 million years deep, when vast sheets of ice covered whole continents, wide grasslands stretched beneath open skies, and great herds of mammoths moved slowly across the frozen steppe. Get comfortable. Breathe slowly. Let the past put you to sleep. You are standing at the edge of a wide, open plain, and the air around you is cold in a way that feels clean rather than harsh. It moves against your skin slowly, without hurry, carrying with it the faint mineral smell of frost and the deeper, quieter smell of frozen earth beneath your feet. The ground here is firm, packed hard by countless seasons of cold, and where your boots would rest, if you look down, you would see a low carpet of pale grass, bent flat by wind that has been blowing across this land for longer than anyone can easily hold in their mind. The sky above you is enormous. It stretches in every direction, pale gray near the horizon, and deepening slowly overhead into a soft, bruised blue. The kind of sky that seems to have room in it for everything. There are no trees near you, only grass and low shrubs. And far in the distance, a line of hills that seem to hold the last of the daylight along their ridges. You listen, and the wind is the first sound you notice, low and steady, moving through the grass in long, unhurried waves, bending the pale stalks first one way and then another, so that the whole plain seems to breathe. Beneath the wind, there is another sound, fainter, almost too distant to name at first. And slowly you understand it as the sound of many large bodies moving together. A soft, rhythmic thud of weight against frozen ground, patient and unbroken. You turn toward it, and there, far across the plain, you see them. Mammoths, a herd of them moving slowly along the edge of the grassland, their coats a deep reddish brown, long and shaggy, hanging low around their legs like old, heavy curtains. Their tusks curve gently upward and outward, pale against the dim light, and their movement has no urgency in it at all. They walk the way water moves through a wide, slow river, each step following the last without hesitation, without haste, as though they have always been walking and will always continue to walk. The cold settles into the air more fully now, and you notice how still everything else feels beneath that low, moving sound. Somewhere near your feet, hidden in the grass, small stems crack faintly under the weight of frost. The light is beginning to change, softening from pale gray toward something dimmer, a color without a clear name, somewhere between silver and violet. You breathe in, and the air is sharp and clean in your chest, and it settles there gently rather than stinging. Far off, beyond the herd, you can make out the pale outline of ice, not close, but present, a long white edge along the horizon where the land seems to end and something older and colder begins. It does not move. It has not moved in a very long time. It simply waits there, patient the way stone is patient, the way deep cold is patient, holding its shape, while everything around it shifts slowly through the seasons. You do not walk toward it. You do not need to. You simply stand where you are, in the grass, in the wind, steady breathing of a very old world, and you let your eyes rest on the herd as it moves further along the plain, smaller now, quieter now, their shapes softening into the gray distance until they are only a suggestion of movement against the land. The wind continues. The grass continues to bend. Somewhere above you, unseen, a bird calls once, low and brief, and then the plain returns to its long quiet. You are still standing there when the scene begins, gently, to widen outward, the plain stretching further than your eyes can hold, the sky deepening further than a single glance can measure, the whole cold world settling around you like a heavy, familiar blanket, and you let it hold you there a while longer before it slowly lets you go. This is a world that paleontologists have spent generations quietly reconstructing, one bone and one buried stone at a time. It began, in the gentlest telling of it, a little more than 2.5 million years ago, when the Earth's climate began to cool in a slow, uneven rhythm that would continue for ages afterward, not as a single long winter, but as a long, patient cycle of cold periods and warmer pauses, ice advancing and retreating again and again across the northern half of the world. Scientists call this larger span of time the Pleistocene, though the plain word for it, and the one that has settled into common memory, is simply the Ice Age. It was not one unbroken freeze from beginning to end. It was closer to a slow breathing of the planet itself, the ice growing for tens of thousands of years, retreating for a time, and gathering again, over and over, in a rhythm too slow for any sin, glee lifetime to notice. Across that long, cold age, the land looked different from the world we know now. Much of the water that would otherwise have filled the oceans was instead locked away in enormous sheets of ice, some of them more than a mile thick, spreading down from the poles and covering huge portions of what is now North America, Northern Europe, and Northern Asia. Because so much water was held in that ice, the sea level dropped low enough in places to expose wide stretches of land that are now underwater, land bridges connecting continents that today are separated by open ocean. Between the great ice sheets and the warmer regions further south lay enormous belts of open grassland, cold and dry, which researchers often call the Mammoth Steppe, a vast corridor of low grasses and hardy shrubs that stretched, at its widest, nearly around the entire top of the world. It was across this cold grassland that the great herds lived, and their names have settled comfortably into memory over the years. Woolly mammoths, with their long curved tusks and their deep shaggy coats, moved in family groups the way modern elephants do, led by older, experienced females who remembered the slow paths between feeding grounds and water. Alongside them lived woolly rhinoceroses, equally thick-coated, equally suited to the cold, grazing quietly on the same frozen grasses. Great cats moved through this world as well. Among them, the cave lion, larger than the lions of today. And further south and later in time, the saber-toothed cats, whose long curved teeth have become one of the most familiar images of this whole era. Herds of bison, wild horses, and reindeer moved across the same open country, each finding its own rhythm within the same cold season, and moving among all of them slowly, patiently, adapting as they always have, were people. Different kinds of people, in fact, sharing this cold world at different times and in different places. The Neanderthals lived across the cold forests and mountain valleys of Europe and Western Asia. For a very long stretch of this age, their bodies compact and powerfully built, well suited to conserving warmth through the long winters. Further east, into Siberia, lived another group known now mostly through a handful of bones, and the DNA drawn quietly from them, a people researchers call the Denisovans, whose fuller story is still being gathered, fragment by fragment, from a few caves and a great deal of patient laboratory work, and gradually moving outward from Africa in slow waves across many thousands of years, came our own species, learning to survive in landscapes far colder than anything our bodies had first evolved for, wrapping themselves in worked hides, building fires, learning the patterns of the herds they depended on. The timeline of all this is not a single clean line, but something more like a slow braid, different threads running alongside each other, sometimes overlapping, sometimes not. The earlier stretches of the Ice Age belong mostly to older human relatives and to animals long since gone from the Earth. The later stretches, closer to us in time, though still impossibly distant by the measure of an ordinary life, belong increasingly to our own kind, learning, adapting, slowly spreading into nearly every corner of the world the ice had left open toward the very end of this age, around 11,500 years ago. The climate began its final long warming, the great ice sheets retreating northward for what would be the last time in this particular cycle. The mammoth steppe slowly breaking apart into forests and wetlands, and the more familiar landscapes we know today. Many of the great cold-adapted animals did not survive that transition. Others adapted or moved north with the retreating cold into the smaller, quieter version of that world we still find today at the far edges of the Arctic. Much of what we know about this long age comes from patient, careful work. Bones drawn gently from frozen ground. Ancient pollen studied grain by grain to understand what plants once grew where. Ice cores drilled deep into glaciers and read like slow calendars of the past. And much of it, too, remains gently uncertain, pieced together from partial evidence, debated quietly in academic journals, revised as new bones and new methods come to light. This is not a finished story. It is an old story, patiently still being told, the way it has been told and retold for as long as people have found bones in the frozen ground and wondered about the great, slow herds that once left them there. Let us begin, then, with the first fact of this quiet night. Fact 1. The Ice Age was not a single unbroken winter, but a long series of cold and warm periods stretching across millions of years. Scientists call the cold stretches glacials, and the warmer pauses between them interglacials, and the two traded places again and again in a slow, patient rhythm. Each glacial period lasted many thousands of years, the ice sheets creeping outward from the poles before slowly retreating once more. We tend to picture the Ice Age as one long frozen scene, and in a sense that memory is not wrong, since cold dominated far more of that span than warmth did. And still, within that cold, there were long, quiet pauses when rivers ran and grass grew green again, before the ice gathered its strength and returned. Fact 2. Woolly mammoths were close relatives of today's elephants, built for a colder world with a longer, denser coat and a thick layer of fat beneath their skin. Their ears were smaller than an elephant's, and their tails shorter too, both changes that helped hold warmth close to the body rather than letting it drift away into the cold air. They used their long, curved tusks to sweep snow aside and reach the grass beneath, a slow, patient motion repeated through the length of every winter. Woolly mammoths did not vanish all at once. A small population survived quietly on Wrangel Island, off the coast of Siberia, for thousands of years after the mainland herds were gone. Fact 3. The Neanderthals were not our ancestors, but our cousins, a separate branch of the same old family tree. For hundreds of thousands of years, they lived across the cold forests and mountain valleys of Europe and Western Asia, their bodies shorter and more solidly built than ours, made for holding warmth against long winters. They made tools, used fire, and cared for their old and their injured, in patterns quiet enough that we are still slowly learning to read them. Neanderthals were not simple, and they were not lesser. They were simply a different answer to the same cold question the Ice Age asked of every living thing. Fact 4. Saber-toothed cats carried teeth longer than a human hand, curved and flattened like blades, though they were not built for tearing through a struggle. Their jaws could open far wider than a modern cat's, allowing them to deliver one careful, precise bite to a large animal's throat, rather than a long fight. Their bodies were heavy and muscular, built more for a short burst of strength than for a long chase. We often imagine them running down prey across open ground, though the evidence suggests something quieter, a patient stalk followed by a single, decisive moment. Afterward, it seems, they simply waited. Fact 5. At the height of the Ice Age, ice sheets more than a mile thick covered much of what is now Canada, the northern United States, and northern Europe. The sheer weight of that ice pressed down on the land beneath it, and in some places the ground is still slowly rising today, thousands of years later, as it settles back into its older shape. Beneath the ice, the world was dark and silent, holding within it whole valleys and rivers that had existed before the cold arrived. When the ice finally retreated, it left behind the wide lakes, gentle hills, and long scattered stones we still see in those northern landscapes now. Fact 6. So much of the world's water was held within these great sheets of ice that the level of the ocean itself dropped, in places by more than 300 feet. Land that that is underwater today stood open and dry through long stretches of the Ice Age, including a wide stretch between Siberia and Alaska, now known as Beringia. Across that exposed land, plants grew, animals wandered, and eventually, slowly, people followed the herds they depended on into a new continent. The land bridge did not last. As the ice melted and the sea rose again, the crossing quietly disappeared beneath the water, leaving only its story behind. Fact 7. The woolly rhinoceros shared the cold grasslands with the mammoth, and shared, too, much of its answer to the cold. A heavy coat of long hair covered its body, and a thick layer of fat lay beneath its skin, holding warmth close against the wind. Its two horns were flattened and long, likely used the same way a mammoth used its tusks, sweeping snow from the low grass to reach the food beneath. We know its shape with unusual clarity, since several frozen specimens have been found nearly whole, preserved in permafrost for tens of thousands of years, their skin and hair still intact. Fact 8. Deep within caves across what is now France and Spain, Ice Age people painted animals onto stone walls using pigments drawn from the earth itself: ochre, charcoal, and clay. The paintings at Lascaux and Chauvet show horses, bison, deer, and lions, rendered with a steady, careful hand, some of them tens of thousands of years old. We do not fully know why these images were made, in places deep and difficult to reach, far from any daily living space, and still, standing before them, researchers have described a quiet, settled feeling, as though the paintings were made slowly, without hurry, for reasons close to the heart of that world. Fact 9. Ice Age humans wore clothing sewn from animal hides, shaped and fitted using needles carved from bone, some thicker than a splinter. Small-eyed needles found at sites across Europe and Asia suggest a careful, practiced craft. Garments layered close to the body to hold in warmth through the coldest months. Without this clothing, human bodies, adapted originally for warmer climates, could not have survived the deep winters of the glacial world. The needle, small and easily overlooked, may have mattered as much to survival as any spear or fire. A quiet tool holding back the cold, stitch by stitch. Fact 10. Fire gave Ice Age people warmth, light, and a way to cook the meat that formed much of their diet in a world with little edible plant life through the long winters. Hearths found at ancient camps show the same careful arrangement of stones, ash layered thick beneath the surface, evidence of fires kept burning, tended, and returned to again and again. Around these fires, people likely gathered in the evenings, sharing food, warmth, and the long, unhurried hours of a cold season. Fire did not simply keep people alive. It gave shape to the day, a still center around which the whole camp gently turned. Fact 11. Cave lions were larger than the lions living in Africa today, and evidence from cave art and preserved remains suggests the males may have lacked the heavy mane we associate with lions now. They ranged widely across Europe and northern Asia, hunting the same herds of deer, bison, and young mammoths that shared their cold grassland home. Their bones bones have been found alongside human tools and images, suggesting a long, quiet coexistence between the two species, each aware of the other's presence across the same wide plains. Frozen cave lion cubs, remarkably preserved in permafrost, have shown us their soft fur in a detail few animals from that age allow. Fact 12. The word megafauna simply means large animals, and the Ice Age is remembered as a world unusually full of them: mammoths, giant sloths, giant deer, and cave bears far larger than their modern relatives. Cold climates and open grasslands seem to have favored larger bodies, since size helps an animal hold onto warmth more easily than a smaller frame can. Toward the end of the Ice Age, as the climate warmed and grasslands gave way to forest, most of these large animals slowly disappeared, unable to adjust as quickly as the world changed around them. What remained afterward were smaller, quieter descendants, echoes of an older, larger world. Fact 13. Dire wolves, familiar now mostly through popular imagination, were real animals that once ranged across North America during the Ice Age, heavier and more powerfully built than the gray wolves we know today. They hunted in packs, likely preying on the large, slow herds of horses, bison, and young mammoths that moved across the same cold plains. Thousands of their bones have been recovered from a single site in California, a tar pit that quietly trapped and preserved them for tens of thousands of years. Their story ended before the Ice Age itself did. One more large, cold-adapted animal unable to follow the world into its next season. Fact 14. Giant ground sloths moved slowly across the Americas during the Ice Age, some species growing as large as a modern elephant, resting on powerful hind legs to reach high branches. Their claws were long and curved, useful for pulling down vegetation, rather than for the fighting we might first imagine when we picture such a claw. Fossilized dung, preserved in dry caves for tens of thousands of years, has given researchers a rare, detailed record of exactly what these slow giants ate through the changing seasons. They were, by every account gathered so far, patient animals, moving through their world without hurry. Fact 15. In parts of what is now Ukraine and Russia, Ice Age people built dwellings using the bones of mammoths, since wood was scarce on the open, treeless steppe. Large leg bones and skulls formed the base of the structure, tusks curved overhead to help hold the frame, and hides likely stretched across the top to close out the wind. Some of these dwellings held the bones of dozens of mammoths, gathered patiently over what may have been generations of use. Standing where one of these sites has been excavated, researchers have described the quiet, careful logic of it. A shelter built entirely from what the cold land was willing to give. Fact 16. Permafrost, ground that remains frozen through every season of the year, has preserved Ice Age remains with a clarity rarely possible anywhere else on Earth. Whole mammoths have been found frozen in this ground, their skin, hair, and even the last plants they had eaten still intact after tens of thousands of years. This slow, cold preservation has allowed scientists to study the actual tissue of animals long vanished from the world, rather than only their bones. As the northern permafrost slowly thaws in warmer recent decades, more of these frozen remains continue quietly to surface. Fact save. Teen. The aurochs was a wild, powerful ancestor of the cattle we know today, standing taller at the shoulder than most modern breeds, with long curved horns and a dark, heavy coat. Herds of aurochs moved across the grasslands and forest edges of ice-age Europe and Asia, grazing much as their much smaller descendants do now. Cave paintings from this period often show the aurochs rendered with particular care, its size and strength clearly important to the people who lived alongside it. The aurochs survived long after the ice age itself ended, the last individuals living quietly in the forests of Poland until the early 17th century. Fact 18. Reindeer, known in North America as caribou, moved in great herds across the Ice Age tundra, following the slow seasonal rhythm of the plants they depended on for food. Ice Age people followed these herds closely, timing their own movements around the reindeer's steady migration between summer and winter grounds. Nearly every part of the reindeer was put to use: meat for food, hide for clothing and shelter, antler and bone shaped patiently into tools. This close, careful relationship between person and herd may have lasted, in some places, for many thousands of years without much change. Fact 19. Small carved figures known as Venus figurines have been found at Ice Age sites across Europe, shaped from stone, ivory, or fired clay, most showing rounded, simplified female forms. The oldest of these figures are tens of thousands of years old, among the earliest known examples of the human hand shaping the human form with any deliberate care. We do not know exactly what they meant to the people who made them, and researchers have offered many quiet, careful guesses over the years. What remains certain is only the patience of the carving itself, small and smooth, clearly meant to be held. Fact 20. Dogs are believed to have been domesticated from wolves sometime during the Ice Age, though researchers continue to debate exactly when and where this first slow partnership began. Early dog remains, distinguishable from wolves by subtle changes in the skull and teeth, have been found buried carefully alongside human remains in some Ice Age sites. This suggests a bond that went beyond simple usefulness, something closer to companionship, even in that early, distant version of the relationship. It is a quiet thought to hold that the dog resting beside a fire tonight carries, somewhere deep within it, the same old partnership. Fact 21. Near the very end of the Ice Age, the climate had already begun its long warming when it suddenly, briefly, turned cold again, a period now called the Younger Dryas. For roughly 1,000 years, temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere dropped sharply, undoing much of the warming that had come before. Scientists still study this sudden reversal carefully, drawing clues from ice cores and lake sediments to understand what caused such an abrupt return to cold. And then, just as it had arrived, the cold released its hold once more, and the long final warming of the Ice Age quietly resumed. Fact 22. The Bering Land Bridge, exposed by the low sea levels of the Ice Age, offered a wide corridor of grassland connecting Siberia to Alaska for thousands of years. Herds of large animals moved slowly across it in both directions, and eventually people followed, drawn by the same herds that had always guided their movement. This slow crossing is thought to be one of the ways early people first reached the Americas, though researchers continue to study other possible routes as well, including travel along the coastline itself. The bridge itself is gone now, resting quietly beneath the cold waters of the Bering Strait. Fact 23. In North America, a distinctive style of stone spear point, wide and carefully fluted at the base, has been found at sites across the continent and is known now as Clovis technology. These points were shaped with patient, practiced skill, designed to be securely fastened to a wooden shaft for hunting the large game still roaming the continent at that time. Sites bearing these tools date to the final stretch of the Ice Age, and for years were thought to mark the very first arrival of people in the Americas. More recent evidence suggests the story reaches back further still, quieter and older than once believed. Fact 24. Steppe bison, ancestors of the smaller bison that still graze in parts of North America today, ranged in enormous herds across the cold grasslands of the Ice Age. They were larger than modern bison, with wide, sweeping horns, built to survive the long winters of the open steppe alongside mammoths and wild horses. Cave paintings frequently include the steppe bison, often rendered mid-stride, captured in the same careful pigment used for the other great herd animals of that world. A remarkably preserved steppe bison, found frozen in the permafrost of Siberia, still S, house the shape of its hump and the texture of its coat. Fact 25. The Ice Age drew slowly to its close around 11,700 years ago, as the climate warmed for what would be the final time in this long cycle, and the great ice sheets retreated toward the poles. Forests spread into land once held by open grassland. Sea levels rose to cover the old land bridges, and many of the great cold-adapted animals slowly vanished from a world no longer shaped for them. This shift marks, in the gentle language geologists use, the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the age we still live in today, called the Holocene. The mammoths and cave lions did not know an age was ending. They simply followed the grass, and the grass moved on without them. Fact 26. Within the long glacial periods of the Ice Age, brief warmer pulses sometimes interrupted the cold, lasting perhaps a few centuries before the deep freeze returned once more. Scientists call these brief pauses interstadials, small warm breaths within a much longer colder exhale. During these gentler stretches, forests crept back into land that had been open tundra, and animal herds shifted their range accordingly, following the retreating edge of the cold. The Ice Age, seen this closely, was never a single flat plain of frost, but something more like a slow, uneven tide, drawing back and returning again and again across an unhurried stretch of time. Fact 27. Fierce, dry winds moving across the Ice Age landscape carried enormous amounts of fine dust, picked up from dry riverbeds and glacial outwash, and laid down again in thick, patient layers called less. Over thousands of years, this dust built up into deep, fertile soil across large parts of Europe, Asia, and North America, some of it many meters thick in places. Much of the good farmland relied upon today, quietly, without notice, rests on soil first carried and laid down by Ice Age wind. The steppe that fed the mammoths, in a slow and roundabout way, still feeds us now, folded gently into the ground beneath our fields. Fact 28. The mammoth steppe was not the grassy plain we might picture from warmer climates, but something colder and drier still, dominated by hardy, low-growing grasses, sedges, and small flowering herbs suited to short, cool summers. This ecosystem, unlike any that exists today in quite the same form, stretched from what is now Spain across all of northern Europe and Asia, over the old Bering Land Bridge, and into parts of North America. It supported an unusually large number of grazing animals at once, since the dry, nutrient-rich grass demanded surprisingly little water to sustain such enormous herds. Researchers sometimes describe it now as a lost world, not gone entirely, but scattered quietly into fragments across the modern Arctic. Fact 29. Cave bears, larger and heavier than the brown bears living today, spent long stretches of the cold season sleeping deep within the same caves, generation after generation, leaving behind thick layers of bone in some sites. Their skeletons show clear signs of the strain that hibernation placed on their bodies, since so much of their yearly cycle depended on stored fat carrying them through months without food. Some caves in Europe contain the remains of thousands of individual cave bears, the same dark, quiet chambers used and returned to across an unimaginable span of winters. It is a strange, still thought that the same stone walls once sheltered so many long, cold sleeps. Fact 30. The Irish elk, despite its name, ranged across much of Europe and Asia rather than only Ireland, and was not truly an elk at all, but an enormous deer, remembered chiefly for its antlers. These antlers could span more than 12 feet from tip to tip, among the largest ever grown by any deer, requiring enormous stores of energy each year simply to regrow. Researchers have quietly debated for generations whether these antlers eventually became a burden the species could no longer sustain as its world changed around it. What remains certain is only their size, preserved whole in the peat bogs of Ireland. A slow, heavy crown laid gently into the dark earth. Fact 31 wild horses moved across both the Eurasian steppe and the grasslands of Ice Age North America. Their bones among the most common finds at ancient hunting sites on both continents. These early horses were smaller and stockier than many modern breeds, built low to the ground, and suited to covering long distances across firm, open terrain. Cave paintings across Europe render horses with particular tenderness, their manets short and upright, their bodies rendered mid-motion in red and black pigment. Horses vanished from the Americas near the end of the Ice Age and would not return to that continent again until humans brought them back many thousands of years later. Fact 32. Musk oxen, still living today in small, scattered herds across the Arctic, are among the few large Ice Age animals to have survived largely unchanged into the present. Their thick, shaggy coats, layered with an especially soft undercoat called kiviut, allowed them to endure temperatures that few other grazing animals could withstand. When threatened, musk oxen form a tight circle, facing outward, the young sheltered quietly at the center, a defense that likely served them well against the cave lions and dire wolves of their older world. In many ways, watching a herd of musk oxen today is as close as we can come to glimpsing the Ice Age itself, still breathing, still standing in the cold. Fact 33. In recent years, scientists have drawn genetic material directly from the frozen remains of woolly mammoths, reading patiently fragments of DNA preserved for tens of thousands of years in ice and permafrost. This work has allowed researchers to trace the mammoth's family tree with a precision impossible from bones alone, showing how populations separated, moved, and slowly changed across the long span of the Ice Age. Some of this genetic material remains remarkably intact, a quiet, chemical echo of a body that stopped moving very long ago. It is a strange comfort, in its way, that something so old can still, gently, speak. Fact 34. Early modern humans in Ice Age Europe are sometimes referred to in older writing as Cro-Magnons, named for a rock shelter in France where their remains were first identified. These were people much like ourselves, tall and slender compared to the sturdier Neanderthals who shared their world for a time, skilled in tool making, art, and the careful working of bone and antler. They lived through some of the coldest stretches of the entire Ice Age, adapting their clothing, shelter, and hunting methods gradually as the climate shifted around them. Their story overlaps quietly with the Neanderthals for thousands of years before the older lineage slowly, gently disappears from the record. Fact 35. Far to the east, in the cold mountains of Siberia, lived a group of ancient people known now mostly through a single small bone, a finger fragment discovered in Denisova Cave, from which an entire lineage takes its name. Scientists have learned an unusual amount about the Denisovans from this small, patient evidence, including hints that they They interbred with both Neanderthals and early modern humans across the vast, quiet reaches of Asia. Their full appearance remains largely unknown to us, sketched only faintly from a handful of bones and the genetic traces left behind. It is a soft kind of mystery, a whole people gathered gently from almost nothing at all. Fact 36. Nearly everyone living today outside of Africa carries a small amount of Neanderthal DNA, a quiet inheritance passed down from interbreeding that occurred tens of thousands of years ago as modern humans moved into regions where Neanderthals still lived. This shared ancestry shows up today in small, specific ways, in certain immune responses, in some patterns of skin and hair, carried forward without most people ever being aware of it. Some populations in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan ancestry as well, inherited through similarly quiet, ancient encounters. In this small, genetic way, those older cousins of ours never fully left. They simply settled in gently and stayed. Fact 37. Beyond the large cave paintings for which the Ice Age is often remembered, people of this era also carved smaller, portable art. Animals and figures worked delicately into ivory, antler, and bone, small enough to be carried or held. Some of these carvings show remarkable, patient detail. A running horse, a swimming reindeer, captured in just a few careful lines across a surface no larger than a hand. Unlike the deep cave paintings, these small objects likely traveled with their makers, carried from camp to camp across long, slow seasons of movement. They are some of the oldest portable art objects known, small enough to be forgotten, and yet somehow, quietly, still here. Fact 38. Among the oldest known musical instruments in the world are flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, found at Ice Age sites in what is now Germany, some more than 40,000 years old. These flutes were carefully hollowed and pierced with evenly spaced holes, shaped with enough precision to produce a genuine, deliberate range of notes. We can only imagine, gently, what these instruments were used for, whether around a fire before a hunt, or simply in some quiet, private moment. It is a soft thing to consider that somewhere in that cold world, someone once sat and made music, and the sound of it is entirely lost to us now, except for the bone that made it. Fact 39. Ochre, a natural earth pigment ranging from yellow to deep red, appears again and again at Ice Age sites, used in cave paintings, ground into powder for burials, and sometimes applied directly to tool, and personal ornaments. Its consistent, careful use across so many different sites and time periods suggests it held meaning well beyond simple decoration, though the exact nature of that meaning remains gently uncertain. Some researchers believe ochre use marks one of the earliest clear signs of symbolic thought, an idea carried in color rather than in words. It is one of the quietest clues we have, a smear of red earth, still faintly visible, tens of thousands of years later. Fact 40. Ice Age burials, though rare in the archaeological record, show a careful, deliberate treatment of the dead, bodies laid in specific positions, sometimes covered in ochre, sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, or the bones of animals. A grave found in Russia held 2 children buried together, adorned with thousands of small ivory beads, each one shaped by hand over what must have been many patient hours of work. These burials suggest an inner life we can only partly reconstruct, a grief or a reverence carried forward in small, careful gestures. The cold ground kept these gestures intact far longer than warmer soil ever could. Fact 41. The long, slow rhythm of the Ice Age, its cycles of cold and warmth stretching across tens of thousands of years, is closely tied to gentle, regular changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt, a pattern known as Milankovitch cycles. These shifts alter, very slightly, how much sunlight reaches different parts of the Earth across the seasons, and over very long spans of time. Small changes of this kind can tip the planet toward growing ice or retreating ice. It is a strange, quiet thought that the vast mammoth herds and the great walls of ice were shaped, in the end, by tiny, patient wobbles in the Earth's path around the sun. Nothing about it was sudden. Everything about it was slow. Fact 42. As glaciers moved across the land during the Ice Age, they carried enormous boulders with them, sometimes for hundreds of miles, before leaving them behind as the ice retreated. Geologists call these displaced stones erratics, easily recognized because they are made of rock entirely different from the ground on which they now rest. Some erratics weigh many tons, resting quietly in fields and forests across the northern hemisphere, having traveled further in one slow glacial journey than most of us will travel in a lifetime. They sit there still, mostly unnoticed, holding within their stone the memory of ice that melted away long ago. Fact 43. Where glaciers slowly carved through valleys and hills, they left behind smooth, rounded landscapes quite different from the sharper shapes carved by rivers or wind. Wide U-shaped valleys, gentle ridges, and long depressions, eventually filled by rain and meltwater into lakes. This shaping was patient rather than sudden, ice grinding stone by stone against the land beneath it across thousands of years. Many of the wide, calm lakes and rolling hills across the northern United States and Europe owe their shape entirely to this old, slow carving. It is a soft kind of sculpture, made without hands, taking as long as it needed to take. Fact 44. As the Ice Age drew toward its end, and the great ice sheets began to melt, enormous volumes of meltwater collected in low-lying areas, forming lakes far larger than any that exist today. Glacial Lake Agassiz held for a time along the retreating edge of the North American ice sheet, once covered an area larger than all of today's Great Lakes combined. When ice dams holding back these waters eventually failed, the resulting floods reshaped huge stretches of land in a matter of days, carving channels and canyons that still remain visible now. These were some of the only truly sudden moments in an age otherwise defined by patience. Fact 45. The disappearance of the Great Ice Age animals, mammoths, giant sloths, cave lions, and so many others, remains a question researchers continue to study carefully, without full agreement on a single cause. Some point to the rapid warming climate, which broke apart the mammoth step faster than many large animals could adjust to a changing landscape. Others point to the slow spread of human hunters into new territory, adding pressure to populations already under strain from a shifting world. Most researchers today believe both forces likely work together, quietly, gradually, rather than any single sudden cause bringing that older world to its end. Fact 46. The short-faced bear, which once ranged across North America during the Ice Age, was among the largest land predators ever known, standing taller at the shoulder than a modern grizzly and considerably longer in the leg. Its proportions suggest an animal built for covering long distances quickly, perhaps to locate carcasses or prey across the wide, open landscape it called home. Despite its size, evidence suggests the short-faced bear may have relied heavily on scavenging, following the same herd, DS, and predators that shaped so much of Ice Age life. It disappeared, like so many others, as the old cold world gave way slowly to a warmer one. Fact 47. The American lion, larger even than the cave lions of Europe and Asia, ranged across much of North America during the Ice Age, likely the largest cat ever to walk the continent. Fossil evidence suggests it hunted the same great herds of horses, bison, and young mammoths that shared its territory, moving alone or perhaps in small, loose groups. Remains recovered from tar pits in California have offered an unusually detailed record of its skeleton, down to the fine structure of its teeth and claws. Like so many of its neighbors, it did not survive the slow unraveling of the world that had shaped it. Fact 48. Giant beavers, some growing as large as a modern black bear, lived in the lakes and wetlands of Ice Age North America, far larger than the beavers we know today. Despite their size, their teeth were shaped differently from modern beavers, suggesting they may not have built dams and lodges in quite the same industrious way. Fossil remains have been found across a wide stretch of the continent, from the Great Lakes region down into the southern United States. It is a gentle, curious thought that so large and strange a creature once moved quietly through waters we would still recognize today. Fact 49. Permafrost, the permanently frozen ground found across much of the Ice Age North, formed slowly as deep cold penetrated further and further into the earth across many thousands of years, without a summer thaw reaching it. In some places, this frozen ground extends hundreds of feet deep, holding within it not only soil and stone, but the preserved remains of the plants and animals that lived above it long ago. Tundra, The treeless landscape, typically resting above permafrost, differs from the drier mammoth steppe in its wetter, mossier ground, though the two often blurred into one another across the wide ice age north. Both landscapes, in their own quiet way, still exist today, smaller now, holding on at the edges of the modern Arctic. Fact 50. Even now, small herds of Ice Age survivors move across the far north, reindeer, musk oxen, and Arctic hares among them, living quietly within landscapes that echo faintly the much larger world their ancestors once knew. Researchers studying these modern populations sometimes describe a strange, gentle continuity, the same slow grazing, the same thick coats, the same patient endurance of a hard season. The great mammoths and cave lions are gone, and still something of that old cold world persists, carried forward in smaller, quieter bodies across the same frozen ground. The Ice Age did not entirely end. It only grew smaller and slower and further away. Fact 51. Across the wide tundra of the Ice Age, silence settled differently than it does in most places today, deep and complete in a way that modern ears rarely encounter, broken only by wind or distant hooves, or the occasional low call of a bird crossing the gray sky above. There were no distant engines, no far-off hum of any kind, only the land itself and the creatures moving slowly across it, each sound arriving clear and alone against that enormous quiet. People living in this world likely grew deeply attuned to small sounds, a cracking branch, a shift in the wind, each one carrying meaning across a silence so wide it seemed to hold the whole sky within it. That kind of stillness is difficult for us to fully imagine now, and yet it shaped, patiently, every sound that was ever made within it. Fact 52. On clear winter nights, the aurora would have drifted across the northern sky in slow curtains of pale green and soft violet, rippling gently overhead as if the cold itself had taken on a shape and a color. For people living beneath those skies, this quiet light must have arrived as one of the most striking, most repeated wonders of a long, dark season, appearing without warning and fading again just as gently. We cannot know exactly what meaning they gave to it, though the presence of sky-facing art and carefully aligned shelters in some regions hints at a world where the heavens were watched closely and perhaps spoken of quietly around the fire. The aurora asked nothing of the world below it. It only moved slowly, night after night, indifferent and beautiful in the same old way it moves still. Fact 53. Strong, dry winds swept regularly across the open steppe, especially near the edges of the great ice sheets, carrying fine dust and loose snow in long, drifting waves across the flattened grass. These winds could rise suddenly and settle just as quickly, leaving the land coated in a pale haze that softened every distant shape into something dim and uncertain. Ice Age people likely timed much of their movement around these patterns, sheltering low against slopes, or within shallow depressions when the wind grew too strong to stand against directly. Even now, in the coldest reaches of the modern Arctic, this same restless wind continues its old habit, moving dust and snow across ground that has barely changed in the ages since. Fact 54. At the far northern reaches of the Ice Age world, the sun barely lifted above the horizon through the depths of winter, casting the land in a long, soft twilight that could stretch through most of the day before fading into true darkness. This extended dimness shaped the daily rhythm of both animals and people in quiet, lasting ways, encouraging longer rest, slower movement, and a closer gathering around whatever warmth could be found. Summers, in turn, brought the opposite extreme, a sun that barely set at all, spreading long golden light across the grazing herds late into what would elsewhere have been full night. This slow trade between darkness and light, repeating every year without fail, gave the whole northern world its own wide, breathing sense of time. Fact 55. Frozen rivers, solid enough to bear considerable weight through the long winter months, often became easier paths of travel than the rough, snow-covered ground beside them, offering a smoother, more direct route across difficult terrain. People and animals alike may have followed these frozen waterways for long stretches, walking along ice worn smooth by wind rather than struggling through deep drifts on either bank. When spring finally loosened its grip on the ice, the same rivers would groan and crack apart in long, slow fractures, breaking the winter's quiet with a sound unlike any other in that world. For a short season each year, the frozen path itself would disappear, and the world would have to find its way across the land once more. Fact 56. The endless white of snow and ice, especially beneath a bright winter sun, could produce a painful glare capable of temporarily affecting the eyes, a condition now called snow blindness. Some Ice Age peoples are believed to have shaped narrow slits into bone or wood worn close against the face, allowing enough vision to travel while shielding the eyes from the harshest brightness. This simple, careful invention reflects a quiet, practical wisdom built up slowly across generations, spent moving through blinding, reflected light. It is a small detail, easy to overlook, and yet it speaks gently to how closely this world required its people to understand the particular dangers of their own bright, cold horizon. Fact 57. Life at an Ice Age camp likely moved in a slow, familiar rhythm built closely around the hearth. Fire tended through the night, food prepared and shared nearby, tools repaired in the flickering, steady light. Evenings probably brought people close together in a way the cold made necessary. Bodies gathered for warmth as much as for company, voices low against the wider silence outside the firelight's reach. This nightly gathering, repeated in some form across countless generations, may have been where much of the era's quiet knowledge passed from older hands to younger ones, story folded gently into practical instruction. The fire asked for nothing beyond tending, and in return it held back, patiently, a cold that never fully went away. Fact 58. Many Ice Age peoples moved with the seasons, following herds of reindeer, horses, or bison along familiar paths repeated year after year, timing their own movement closely to the slow rhythm of animal migration. This was not wandering without direction, but a careful, learned pattern, passed down and adjusted gradually as herds shifted their own routes in response to changing grass and weather. Camps were likely built to be taken apart easily, hides and poles light enough to carry, since permanence mattered less than staying close to the animals that sustained an entire community. In this way, the whole of a person's yearly life might trace, slowly and faithfully, the same wide, looping path the herds themselves had always followed. Fact 59. Where glaciers met open water, enormous slabs of ice would occasionally break away and fall, a process called calving, producing a deep, rolling sound that could carry for a very long distance across still air. For anyone standing near enough to hear it, this sound must have arrived as one of the few truly sudden events in an otherwise slow and steady landscape, a brief reminder of the ice's enormous, unhurried power. Between these rare moments, the glaciers themselves remained silent, vast pale walls simply standing at the edge of the world, patient in a way nothing living quite manages to be. The sound of calving ice still echoes today, wherever glaciers meet the sea. One of the few voices the Ice Age still speaks in a language unchanged across all this time. Fact 60. Where the ground allowed it, small, hardy plants clung close to the cold earth of the Ice Age steppe. Dwarf willows spreading low and flat rather than upward, cotton, grass trembling in pale tufts above the frozen ground beneath it. These plants had adapted, slowly and patiently, to a world of short summers and long, hard winters, growing low to avoid the worst of the wind, and storing what little warmth the brief season offered. Grazing herds depended entirely on this modest, persistent greenery, returning to the same patches of ground year after year as the plants slowly renewed themselves each spring. There was no abundance in this landscape, only a quiet, careful sufficiency, enough grass, gathered slowly enough to hold an entire world of large, hungry animals through another season. Fact 61. Beneath the snow, hidden from the coldest air above, a quiet world of insects and small creatures continued through the winter in slow, protected burrows, sheltered by the very snow that seemed, from above, to promise only cold and stillness. This layer, sometimes called the subnivean zone, stayed warmer and more stable than the exposed air above it, allowing small life to persist through months that would otherwise prove impossible to survive. Voles, lemmings, and various insects moved through this hidden space, rarely seen, rarely thought of, and yet essential to the wider web of life above them. Even in the harshest stretches of the Ice Age, then, the cold never quite reached everywhere at once, and small, quiet lives continued on beneath the surface of the world's harder face. Fact 62. Birds suited to extreme cold moved across the Ice Age skies in patterns not unlike those we still see in the far north today. Ptarmigan shifting their plumage to match the season, snowy owls gliding low and silent above open, snow-covered ground. These birds adapted their bodies and behavior slowly across many generations, growing thicker feathers, storing more fat, timing their breeding to the brief, precious window of summer warmth. Their presence would have added a small, steady rhythm to the wider stillness of the steppe. A call carried on the wind, a shape crossing low against a pale sky. Watching them now, in the modern Arctic, offers a rare, quiet window into a much older, wider version of the same patient, cold-adapted life. Fact 63. Where rivers remained open through parts of the year, fish, especially migrating salmon in some regions, offered a steady and valuable source of food for Ice Age communities settled near their banks. People likely gathered at familiar bends and shallows where fish moved in greater numbers, waiting patiently with simple tools shaped from bone and stone to take what the river offered each season. This reliance on fish, alongside the larger herds of the open steppe, suggests a diet built from careful attention to many different, quietly overlapping sources of food. The river gave what it gave, season after season, and those who lived closely beside it learned, slowly, exactly when and where to ask. Fact 64. Shaping stone into tools was slow, careful work. Each strike of one stone against another, removing a small, precise flake, until a blade, a point, or a scraper emerged from what had once been a plain, unshaped rock. This process, called knapping, required years of practice to master. Knowledge passed down patiently from one generation to the next through demonstration rather than instruction. Sitting near a fire, shaping stone in slow, repeated motions, may have been one of the most common, most quietly meditative acts of daily Ice Age life. The tools themselves were practical, and yet the making of them, repeated so many times across so many long evenings, likely carried its own soft, steady rhythm. Fact 65. Faint impressions of woven plant fiber, pressed accidentally into soft clay that later hardened, have offered rare evidence that Ice Age people wove cordage, netting, and possibly simple textiles from plant material long before any actual woven fabric could have survived the passing of so much time. These delicate traces suggest a quiet skill working alongside the more familiar crafts of stone and bone. Fingers twisting fiber into cord for nets, snares, or ties. Almost nothing of the material itself remains today. And yet, its faint shadow, pressed into clay tens of thousands of years ago, still holds the memory of hands moving patiently back and forth. It is one of the softest, quietest clues this era has left behind, a texture rather than an object. Fact 66. Shelter across the Ice Age took many quiet forms. Hide tents stretched over light wooden poles for those following the herds. More solid pit houses dug partly into the earth for for those staying longer in one place, each built to hold warmth against a long and demanding winter. These structures were shaped by careful, practical knowledge, oriented often to shield against the prevailing wind, insulated with packed earth, grass, or additional hides layered against the cold. Inside, a small hearth would have provided most of the warmth and light needed to make the space livable through the darkest months. However humble these shelters may seem from a distance, they represent, in their own quiet way, a deeply practiced answer to one of the era's most constant and pressing questions. Fact 67. Tracking a single animal across open, snow-covered ground required a slow, patient attentiveness, reading the shape and depth of a print, the spacing between steps, the faint disturbance of grass or brush along a trail that might otherwise seem entirely undisturbed. Hunters likely spent long hours simply following these small signs, moving quietly and without hurry, since a rushed approach across open ground offered little chance of success against animals as alert as the herds of that world. This patience extended beyond the hunt itself into a wider, careful awareness of the whole landscape, whether wind direction, the position of the sun. It was a quiet kind of expertise, built slowly over a lifetime, closer to listening than to chasing. Fact 68. The long, dark winters of the higher Ice Age latitudes likely shaped sleep itself into something different from what we know today. Longer stretches of rest, broken perhaps into several quiet periods across the extended dark, rather than one single unbroken night. With little daylight to mark the day's structure, people may have rested more in response to cold, firelight, and the needs of the body than to any fixed and even rhythm. Some researchers studying modern populations living without artificial light have found a similar pattern, sleep settling into two calmer, connected phases rather than one long stretch. It is a gentle thought to carry into your own rest tonight, that this slower, layered kind of sleep may be closer to how the body was always meant to settle. Fact 69. Rock shelters, natural overhangs of stone offering partial protection from wind and rain, served as long-used gathering places across many parts of the Ice Age world, returned to again and again across countless generations. Layers of ash, tool fragments, and bone accumulated slowly within these shelters, each layer resting quietly atop the last, forming a soft, careful record of repeated use across an enormous span of time. Some of these sites show evidence of use stretching across tens of thousands of years. Family after family, finding the same patient shelter beneath the same old stone. Sitting within one today, it is possible to feel faintly the accumulated weight of so much quiet, repeated living. Fact 70. The woolly rhinoceros, along with the woolly mammoth, carried a distinct hump across its shoulders, formed not of bone, but of stored fat, held there as a slow, steady reserve against the leanest stretches of winter. This same strategy appears, in gentler form, in some animals still living in cold climates today. Fat stored deliberately It reflects a quiet, patient kind of preparation. The body itself planning ahead for a season it already expects will be difficult. In this small physical detail, we find one more soft answer to the same old question the entire Ice Age seemed to ask of everything living within it: how to hold enough warmth and enough reserve to simply continue. Fact 71. Ice Age lakes froze and thawed with the turning of each year, their surfaces groaning and cracking in long, low sounds as the ice shifted and settled through the coldest months. In spring, this same ice would begin to soften and split apart, drifting slowly across the water in pale, uneven sheets before finally dissolving back into open water for a brief season. These sounds, deep and resonant, carrying easily across still, cold air, would have marked the turning of the seasons as clearly as any other sign available to the people listening nearby. Lake Ice still speaks in this same old voice today, wherever winter settles deeply enough to still a body of water into stillness. Fact 72. Materials such as shell, amber, and certain kinds of fine stone traveled remarkable distances across Ice Age Europe and Asia, carried gradually from community to community along quiet, informal networks of exchange rather than any single long journey. Marine shells found hundreds of miles from any coastline suggest these connections stretched further and lasted longer than we might first assume for a world often imagined as isolated and disconnected. Such exchange likely carried more than material goods, knowledge, language, and custom, moving slowly alongside the objects themselves from one distant group to another. It is a soft reminder that even in so vast and cold a world, no single community stood entirely alone. Fact 73. Mammoth herds, like the elephant herds of today, were likely organized around older, experienced females who carried, patiently, the accumulated knowledge of where water and food could be found across a difficult and shifting landscape. Vess stayed close to their mothers for years, learning slowly by watching and following rather than through any single lesson, absorbing the herd's quiet wisdom gradually across an entire childhood. Males, once grown, are believed to have left the family group to live more solitary lives, occasionally joining loose, temporary groups with other males. This same soft, careful social structure, still visible in elephants today, offers one of our gentlest windows into the daily, ordinary life of the mammoth herd. Fact 74. The disappearance of so many great Ice Age animals remains, in its full detail, a quiet, unresolved question. Researchers continuing to weigh evidence carefully, rather than settling on any single simple answer. Climate change, human hunting, disease, and shifting habitats all likely played some part, intertwined in ways difficult now to fully separate from one another after so much time has passed. Different species seem to have responded differently, some vanishing quickly as their world changed, others lingering in smaller, more isolated pockets for centuries longer. This is not a mystery with rising tension or hidden danger, only a slow, layered puzzle pieced together gently, one bone and one layer of soil at a time. Fact 75. Time, across the whole span of the Ice Age, moved at a pace almost impossible for a single human life to hold within it. Changes measured not in years or decades, but in many thousands of years, passing quietly, one slow season after another. A glacier advancing across a valley might take longer to arrive than any person alive at its start would ever witness reaching its edge. This vast, unhurried patience runs through everything we have gathered so far. The shaping of stone, the slow drift of ice, the gradual turning of grassland into forest. It asks nothing of us except, perhaps, a willingness to slow down ourselves, if only for the length of this quiet night, and rest inside a little of that same old patience. Fact 76. Away from any city light, the Ice Age night sky would have appeared far brighter and far more crowded with stars than most of us ever see today. The Milky Way spread clearly overhead in a soft, pale band on clear, cold nights, without any artificial glow to compete with. Even faint stars would have stood out clearly against the darkness, and the moon, when full, could have lit the open steppe well enough to walk by. People living beneath this sky likely came to know its slow turning closely, the shifting position of certain bright stars marking, gently, the passing of the seasons. It is one of the few things from that whole distant world that remains almost entirely unchanged. The same stars, the same slow wheel of sky, waiting patiently above us still. Fact 77. Where forests met the edge of the open steppe, the air would have carried the sharp, resinous smell of pine and spruce, mixed with the cooler, damp scent of moss and old, settled earth beneath the trees. This boundary between forest and grassland shifted slowly with the climate, retreating during the coldest stretches and creeping forward again during gentler pauses, so that the smell of the forest itself marked, in its own quiet way, the turning of a much longer season than any single year could hold. Animals moved along this edge as well, some preferring the shelter of the trees, others the open reach of the grass beyond it. Standing at that boundary, a person could have felt, in scent alone, two different worlds resting quietly side by side. Fact 78. Deep beneath the surface, layers of sediment settled slowly across the Ice Age, one thin deposit resting upon the last, each one holding a small, faithful record of the conditions present when it formed: pollen grains, dust, ash, or fine grains of stone. Scientists now read these layers much as one might read the pages of a very slow, very patient book, each layer offering a narrow window into a single stretch of time long since past. Some of these sediment records stretch back hundreds of thousands of years, undisturbed, waiting quietly beneath lakes, bogs, and the ocean floor. It is a soft, humbling thought that the ground itself has been patiently writing this story down the entire time, long long before anyone thought to ask it to. Fact 79. In certain regions, tree resin hardened slowly over long stretches of time into amber, sometimes preserving within it tiny insects, seeds, or fragments of plant life caught at the exact moment the resin first became still. While much of the amber found today formed earlier than the Ice Age itself, its slow, patient process of preservation mirrors much of what the era left behind. More broadly, delicate details held gently in place by something harder and more lasting than the fragile life within it. Holding a piece of amber with an insect caught inside offers a strange, quiet intimacy with a moment from an unimaginably distant afternoon. Nothing aboo. That moment was meant to last, and yet, somehow, gently, it did. Fact 80. Fire may have been the very first true shelter human ancestors ever built for themselves. Not a wall or a roof, but a small, steady circle of warmth and light carried with them wherever they went across the cold, wide world. Around this fire, the coldest nights became survivable. Food became easier to digest, and the long, dark hours found a center to gather around rather than simply enduring alone. In many ways, every later kind of shelter, hide tent, timber house, stone hearth, grew outward from this same first idea. Warmth held close, shared, and carefully tended. It is worth remembering, on a night like this one, that long before any roof was raised, it was simply a small, patient fire that first kept the cold at bay. Fact 81. Snow itself, despite its cold appearance, acts as a surprisingly effective insulator, trapping still air within its loose structure and helping to hold warmth close to the ground beneath it, rather than letting it escape into the open air above. Ice Age people and animals alike likely made use of this quiet property, animals bedding down in snow rather than avoiding it, people sometimes banking snow against the base of a shelter to seal out the wind more fully. What looks from the outside like nothing but cold and hardship held within it quietly a kind of gentle protection. The snow that seems to close a world down was, in its own patient way, also holding a small warmth safely inside it. Fact 82. In a small number of regions touched by geothermal activity, warm springs bubbled up through the frozen ground, even during the coldest stretches of the Ice Age, offering rare pockets of heat within an otherwise unforgiving landscape. Both animals and people are believed to have gathered near these warm waters during the hardest parts of winter, drawn by a warmth the surrounding world could not otherwise provide. Some of these same springs remain active today, still rising gently through frozen or half-frozen ground in a few scattered corners of the world. It is a soft, comforting thought that even within the coldest of ages, small, patient pockets of warmth were always, somewhere, quietly waiting to be found. Fact 83. Ice Age people likely became closely attuned to subtle signs of coming weather, the particular color and shape of clouds gathering along the horizon, shifts in wind direction, the restless behavior of birds, or grazing herds before a storm arrived. This kind of careful, accumulated observation, passed down slowly across generations, would have offered a quiet, practical advantage in a world where sudden weather could mean the difference between comfort and real hardship. It was not knowledge written down, but knowledge held closely in the body and the memory, renewed and confirmed every season. In this slow, careful reading of sky and animal, we find one more example of how closely this world asked its people to pay attention. Fact 84. Deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists today drill long cylinders of ice called ice cores, each one holding within its layered structure a patient record of the atmosphere stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Tiny bubbles of ancient air, trapped within the ice at the moment it formed, allow researchers to measure the very composition of the sky as it existed long before any written record began. These cores, some more than 2 miles long, read almost like frozen calendars, each layer marking a single year of snowfall, compressed slowly into solid ice by the weight of all the years above it. It is a strange, quiet privilege to hold, quite literally, a fragment of that old, patient sky. Fact 85. Snowfall itself, quiet and steady, carries a particular kind of stillness, unlike almost any other weather, muffling distant sound, softening the edges of every visible shape, settling slowly and without hurry over whatever ground it touches. Across the Ice Age, snow of this kind would have fallen across the same wide plains, the same quiet forests, the same patient herds, again and again, season after season, for longer than any single memory could hold. There is something gently unchanged in this, that the hush of falling snow tonight is the very same hush that once settled over mammoths and cave lions, over hearths long since gone cold. The snow does not know how much time has passed. It only falls the same way it always has. Fact 86. Bone and antler tools, shaped carefully by Ice Age hands, often grew smoother and more polished the longer they were used, worn gently by repeated handling, until their surface took on a soft, almost gleaming quality quite different from a freshly carved piece. Archaeologists can sometimes tell, simply by this quiet polish, how long and how often a particular tool was held, used, and returned to across a person's daily life. This slow transformation, from rough new object to smooth, familiar tool, mirrors something gentle in how any long-used thing comes to fit its owner's hand over time. Somewhere in that quiet polish rests years of ordinary, patient use, worn in slowly, the way a life is worn in. Fact 87. Rivers born from Ice Age meltwater carved their paths slowly through rock and soil, deepening gradually across thousands of years, until some grew into wide, dramatic canyons far larger than the modest streams that first began them. This process required no sudden force at all, only patient, repeated erosion, water moving the same path again and again until stone itself finally gave way. Many of the canyons and gorges admired today for their scale and beauty were shaped quietly by exactly this kind of slow persistence, unhurried by any need to finish quickly. It is a gentle reminder that some of the most striking shapes in the world were made not by force, but simply by time, allowed to keep moving. Fact 88. Each spring, migratory birds return to the Ice Age north in great, weary flocks, arriving just as the snow began its slow retreat, and the first hardy plants began pushing upward through the thawing ground. Their arrival would have marked, clearly and reliably, the turning of the hardest season into something gentler, a signal understood easily by anyone paying attention to the sky above the melting steppe. This same rhythm continues today in the far north. Birds still returning each spring along paths their ancestors first learned during the Ice Age itself. It is a small, steady kind of continuity, a promise kept every year that even the longest winter eventually, patiently, comes to its end. Fact 89. Much of the fertile soil now used to grow food across large parts of the world was born, quietly and indirectly, from the Ice Age itself, ground by glaciers, carried by wind, and slowly deposited across the land in the patient layers of dust called less. Without the particular grinding action of ancient ice and the steady winds that followed it, much of today's most productive farmland would hold a very different character altogether. In this soft, indirect way, the deep cold of that ancient world continues to feed us now. Folded gently into fields, most people walk across without a single thought of where the ground beneath them first came from. The Ice Age never fully left. Some of it simply became the food on our tables. Fact 90. What remains of the Ice Age today rests mostly in quiet places, bones settled deep in permafrost, stone tools resting undisturbed in old riverbanks, faint paintings still holding their color in the dark of a cave no wind has reached in tens of thousands of years. These remnants do not announce themselves. They wait patiently for someone willing to look closely, to dig gently, to listen for what the ground has been holding all this time. In this way, the era has never fully ended, only quieted, folding itself slowly into the deeper layers of the world. We now walk across every day without a second thought. It is still there, resting, patient, beneath our feet. Fact 91. The very last woolly mammoths on Earth lived out their final generations in isolation on Wrangel Island, off the northern coast of Siberia, cut off from the mainland as rising seas closed the land bridge that had once connected them to the wider world. For thousands of years after mainland mammoths had disappeared entirely, this small, isolated population continued quietly on, adapting slowly to a shrinking island and a changing climate around them. Their final disappearance came gently, without any single dramatic event marking its arrival. Simply a slow, gradual fading of a population already worn thin by isolation. Somewhere on that quiet, windswept island, the age of the mammoth drew, at last, to its softest and most solitary close. Fact 92. Elephants living today, distant relatives of the woolly mammoth, still carry within their genetic code small echoes of that older, cold-adapted lineage, a quiet thread connecting the warm forests of today to the frozen steppe of long ago. Some researchers have studied this connection closely, hoping to understand more fully how the mammoth's body once solved the particular puzzle of surviving such extreme and lasting cold. In every elephant alive today, moving slowly through warm grass under a very different sky, something quiet and ancient still persists, carried forward without any memory of the world it first came from. It is a soft, patient kind of continuity, unnoticed by the elephant itself, and yet real all the same. Fact 93. As the final warming of the Ice Age took hold, glaciers that had rested across whole continents for tens of thousands of years began their long, slow retreat toward the poles, releasing land, water, and life back into a world remaking itself gradually beneath a softening sky. This retreat was not sudden or dramatic, but enfolded gently across thousands of years, forests spreading slowly northward, grasslands shifting shape, rivers finding new paths across newly opened ground. The world did not wake up one day changed. It simply, patiently, continued becoming something different, the way it always had, one slow season folding quietly into the next. Fact 94. Much of the landscape we walk through today, the wide, calm lakes of the northern hemisphere, the smooth, rolling hills, the long ridges of stone left resting in open fields, still carries the quiet shape first given to it by Ice Age glaciers. These features were carved slowly, patiently, by ice that has long since melted away, leaving only its handiwork behind for the world that followed it. Walking across such a landscape today, even without knowing its history, is to walk gently across the last remaining shape of that older, colder world. The glaciers themselves are gone. What they left behind still holds their memory quietly in stone and hill and hollow. Fact 95. If there is a single soft lesson carried forward from the whole long span of the Ice Age, it may simply be this: that survival across such an enormous stretch of difficult time rarely came from strength alone, but from patience, adaptation, and a willingness to change slowly alongside a changing world. The animals and people who endured longest were not always the largest or the fiercest, but often the ones most capable of adjusting quietly to what each new season required of them. This is a gentle thing to carry with us now, in a much smaller and much warmer version of the world they once knew. Patience, it seems, was always the quieter, steadier answer. Fact 96. Stone, more than almost any other material from the Ice Age, has endured across the full stretch of time since it was first shaped. Tools and blades resting largely unchanged in the ground long after the hands that made them, and the flesh those hands once belonged to, have entirely disappeared. This quiet endurance gives stone tools an outsized presence in what we know of this era. Not because stone mattered more than bone or wood or hide, but simply because it alone was patient enough to wait for us. Everything else, the fire, the voice, the warmth of a shared hearth, has long since faded into silence, leaving only its harder, quieter traces behind. What remains is never the whole story, only the part patient enough to still be here. Fact 97. The shift from the Ice Age into the warmer world that followed was not a boundary crossed all at once, but a slow, quiet handoff, one era easing gradually into the next the way. A season eases from autumn into the deep hush of winter. Animals and plants shifted their range gradually, some vanishing slowly, others adjusting and enduring, and human communities changed their ways of living step by patient step alongside the warming world around them. There was no single morning when the Ice Age ended and something else began. There was only, gradually, a world becoming something different, the way any long, slow thing becomes something else without ever quite marking the exact moment of the change. Fact 98. If the deep past could speak now, in this last quiet stretch of the night, its voice would likely arrive the way most of its evidence has always arrived to us, faint, patient, and easily missed if we are not listening closely enough. It would speak, perhaps, not in triumph or tragedy, but simply in the plain, steady language of survival and change. One season answering the next across a span of time too long for any single voice to fully hold. We have gathered across this night only the smallest fragments of that much larger, much quieter conversation. And still, even in fragments, something of that old world reaches us gently across all this distance. Fact 99. Everything that lived through the Ice Age, mammoth and mouse alike, cave lion and quiet vole beneath the snow, met that world the only way it could be met, slowly, patiently, one cold season answered by one small adaptation at a time. There was no shortcut through so long, and demanding an age only endurance, repeated gently across generation after generation, until, eventually, the hardest of it had passed. This patient, unhurried endurance is, in its own way, one of the oldest and gentlest lessons the deep past still offers us, carried forward quietly across all the ages since. It asks nothing dramatic of us. It only asks that we, too, learn to wait. Fact 100. And so the Ice Age drew to its close the way so much of it had unfolded from the very beginning, slowly, patiently, without any single dramatic moment marking its true end. The ice retreated the way it had always advanced, gradually. The grass returned the way it always had, gently, and the great herds that once moved across that wide, cold world faded quietly into memory, and then into bone, and then into the patient, careful W, orc of those who would spend generations learning to listen to what they had left behind. Nothing about this world asked to be remembered. It simply continued slowly, for as long as it could, and left behind, for us, a great deal of quiet, patient evidence of having been here at all. You're standing again at the edge of that same wide plain, and the light has shifted further now, the sky settling into a deeper, softer shade of blue along the horizon, the last pale gold fading slowly behind the distant hills. The wind moves the same way it always has, low and steady through the pale grass, bending each stalk gently before releasing it, over and over, without hurry. Somewhere far off, the herd you watched earlier has long since passed beyond sight, and the plain feels now wider and quieter for their absence, though not empty, never quite empty, only settled into its older, more familiar stillness. You breathe in, and the air is cooler now, carrying the same clean scent of frost and old earth it carried before, and it fills your chest slowly, the way it has every time tonight, patient and unhurried, and entirely without strain. The stars are beginning to show themselves above you, faint at first, then slowly more certain, scattered across a sky far darker and far wider than the one you usually know. You do not search for shapes among them. You simply let your eyes rest there, allowing the whole enormous quiet of that sky to settle over you the way the cold has settled over the grass at your feet. Somewhere behind you, though you cannot quite place where, you sense rather than hear the last low warmth of a fire, small and steady, burning down slowly toward its final hours, the way every fire eventually does. You do not need to turn toward it. You know simply that it is there, patient, low, and quiet, holding its small warmth exactly as long as it is able to. The plain around you grows dimmer and softer, and further away, the grass fading gently into shadow, the distant hills losing their last edge of light, the whole wide world settling slowly into the deep, unhurried dark it has always known at the end of every long day. Your breathing slows further still, matching, almost without noticing, the same patient rhythm the wind has kept all along. The fire behind you burns lower. Its light grows smaller. Its warmth grows quieter, gentler, closer, until it is little more than a soft, steady glow resting low against the dark. Embers settling slowly into themselves, the way the whole of this ancient world has always, eventually, settled into rest. Sleep well. The past has waited a long time to be told. Tomorrow, we return to a different world,